There's been a shift throughout the years. And I recognize that most of you have a greater perspective on this than I do. You've lived more years than I have. But I think you're going to agree with me, there's been a shift to a more casual world. It dawned on me a few months ago, well, back in April, I noticed some of my white dress shirts weren't so white anymore. And out of curiosity, I looked to find if one of my favorite formal wear companies had a sale going on. It's an old company, been in business since the 1800s, based in London. The website was down. Did some investigating and realized that they were in financial trouble and they had to be bought out by another company for the second time. There's a lot of factors that played into it. Part of it was the lockdowns, when everyone was at home and nobody needed to come to the office. There wasn't as much of a need for formal clothes. And even if people had important business meetings over Zoom, they might have thrown on a nice shirt, but you know they were probably wearing sweatpants below the camera. But it wasn't just the lockdowns. They were in a decline for years before the lockdowns due to a shift to a more casual world. Now you might miss those formal days, or maybe you kind of like this shift, the casual styling. I enjoy the casual style from Monday through Saturday. I enjoy not putting a tie on those days. But it's not just fashion, is it? That's shifting to casual. Everything is going casual nowadays. I'm sure you've noticed the culture's view of marriage is going casual. Dating, going casual. The culture's view on the value of human life, going casual. Everything is going casual, and I wonder if, too, our view of God is going casual. There's a country singer named Josh Turner, and I like his music. He's got a song called Me and God. It's all about how he and God are buddies. They're a team. There's nothing that the two of them can't do together, and you might even say that the two of them are two peas in a pod, he and God, he says. I don't know, Josh. I don't know if you want God to be just like you. I think you might not. Has our view of God gone casual? Has our awe of God kind of dulled? As we take a look at Exodus chapter 3 today, God is going to cause us to be filled with awe at who our God is, and then to rejoice that He is who He is. That day for Moses started out as a casual day. Just like any other day he'd had in the last 40 years. Employed by his father-in-law, that's the dream, right? Working as a shepherd for his father-in-law's sheep. I wonder if as Moses spent time in the great outdoors guiding those sheep. I wonder if he didn't have a lot of time to reflect on his life. There was a lot of life to reflect back on. He was 80 years old at this point. I wonder if he didn't think back to those earliest memories, being embraced by his mother, who, by the intervening hand of God, was enabled to care for her own son despite an edict to have every Israelite newborn murdered. I wonder if Moses didn't think back to those days of his childhood. Growing up then in Egyptian royalty, as he was adopted by none other than Pharaoh's daughter. And yet his heart wasn't with the Egyptians. His heart was with his people, the Israelites, with their God, his God. I wonder if he didn't think back to that day 40 years prior, when he went out to be among his people and he was horrified at what he saw, the Israelites working so hard and being beaten. And he snapped that day. Moses' anger just filled up inside of him, and he snapped and he looked around to make sure no one was watching, and he murdered that Egyptian. Tried to cover his tracks, but it was too late. Word spread. He had no choice but to flee to Midian, of all places. As a foreigner in a foreign land for 40 years. And still, God had been so good to him. God had forgiven him. God had even blessed him with a wife while he was there and with a baby boy. God had kept him safe and provided for him, gave him a job. What a life it had been. Suddenly, something snapped Moses out of his trip down memory lane. Something caught his eye as he scanned across to make sure there was no danger for those sheep. Fire. Not a wildfire that was spreading, but a fire in a single bush. But there was something so strange about this that the leaves weren't disappearing into the flame. The branches weren't crackling and being consumed. I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up, Moses thought. And as he drew closer, this strange sight became stranger when this bush started calling out to him. And stranger yet, knew his name. Moses, Moses, here I am, he said. Finally, the voice identified himself. No, not quite yet. First, the voice said, "Do not come any closer." And Moses froze. The voice said, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." A sign of respect that Moses was prompt to follow. And then, finally, the voice identified himself. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And finally it all made sense. Why the fire burned miraculously in this bush. Why the ground he was standing on was holy ground. It wasn't because it was a special kind of bush or because it was a special kind of soil. It was because God was there. God was there in Moses' presence. The God of eternity who transcends space and time, who set the universe in its place, the God who alone determines right and wrong, the God who is so perfect our minds can barely begin to wrap our heads around it. God was there. And Moses was afraid. He hid his face. He was afraid to look at God. You see, Moses, he understood something about himself. And he understood something about God. Moses knew that he was a sinner. His self-reflection made that very clear. And he knew that God is holy. He knew that he was unworthy to stand in the presence of a holy God. He knew that a sinner can't stand in the presence of a holy God and live. He understood this. Do we? Perhaps our view of God has gone casual. Perhaps our view of our sin has gone casual, that we think, oh, it's not a big deal, but God is holy. Perhaps our awe of God's holiness has grown dull. Perhaps sometimes instead of coming before God as a beggar, we come before Him entitled. Maybe sometimes that attitude of unworthiness before God, we kind of flip the script on Him. As if He's only worthy of our time and attention when it's convenient for us. Or perhaps we know God's holiness, but we want to enter into it on our own terms. That if I just clean myself up a little bit, then I can enter into God's presence. But God is perfectly holy. And if we're trying to enter into God's presence on our terms, our prayer will always be not, "Come, O Lord," but rather, "O Lord, don't come yet." The truth is, sin is incompatible with a holy God. It's a scary truth, isn't it? A truth that causes us to shrink in unworthiness before Him. The only way for you and I to enter into the presence of a holy God is if our holy Lord is also a Lord of free and faithful grace. The only way is if our holy Lord is a God of free and faithful grace who would enter into our presence in grace to bring us to Him. Is the Lord who appeared to Moses that day, is He that Lord? Is your Lord the Lord of free and faithful grace? God's answer to you this morning is, I am. There's something about that name. When the Lord said He was sending Moses to lead His people out of Egypt, and Moses had all these reservations, and he said, what if they ask me what your name is? What am I to tell them? And the Lord's response, He said, I am who I am. This is what you are to tell the Israelites. I am sent me to you. There's something about that name. You keep reading, and that name is going to pop up again and again and again. You keep reading from Exodus chapter 3, and it's going to take you a while to get there, but it's time well spent. But finally, you'll find in the Gospel according to John that name, I am, again and again and again. I am the bread of life. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the true vine. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. No one stands in God's presence except through me, Jesus said. It's almost as if Moses is speaking to Jesus Himself. And that's because He is. He's called the angel of the Lord, then He's called God, then the Lord, small caps, and the Lord, big caps, or big letters. It's the eternal second person of the Trinity, the Son of God before He was born in human flesh, speaking to Moses that day. Jesus, the same Lord, the same Lord whose holiness is so pure that Moses was afraid to enter into His presence. He's the same Lord who used His holiness to save you. Jesus, the same Lord who warned Moses, don't come any closer, is the same Lord who says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The same Lord who said, take off your sandals because the ground you're standing on is holy, is the same Lord who got down on the ground to to wash the feet of the sinners he came to save. Jesus, the same Lord whose holiness should incinerate us, is the same Lord who burned on the cross, who burned in the fires of hell on the cross to bring you into the Lord's presence forever. If it seems like those pairings are contradictory, they're not. They go together perfectly. It's like law and gospel. But it is law and gospel. When the perfection of God that He presents to us in the law fills us with fear. When our consciences are burdened, we cry out to the Lord, "Oh Lord, save. Come and save." And the Lord responds in His Word. He points you to the manger and to the cross and to the empty tomb. And He smiles and answers, "I already have." Your holy Lord is the Lord of free and faithful grace. He appeared to Moses that day not to incinerate him, but to promise him. Nothing can stop me from bringing my people out of Egypt and into the land that I promised them. Nothing can stop me from giving them a promised land, and out of that promised land, nothing can stop me, the Lord says, from coming into the world. Out of that land and out of that people, to be born as a human being and named Jesus to save you. And that's exactly what He did. And He's coming again for you. There's nothing the Lord wants more than for you to be in His presence forever, and He's coming again to bring you to Him forever. In the meantime, we stand in awe of who the Lord is, and we rejoice that He is who He is. We stand in awe as the Lord comes to us in His Word with that comforting message that He loves you and forgives you, and you're His own. We stand in awe as we today witnessed a baptism. The Lord came to this child and in a miraculous way brought this child into His own family. We stand in awe and we rejoice as we remember what our baptism means for us. And we stand in awe in just a few minutes as the Lord comes to us in flesh and blood, truly present in, with, and under the bread and the wine, to give you forgiveness and to strengthen you. We stand in awe and we rejoice that He does. We stand in awe and we rejoice that God is who He is. He is the Lord of free and faithful grace. He is the great I Am, who brings you into the Lord's presence forever.